All right, we have another candidate for you guys. It's Imani Oakley. She's the candidate we just told you about a minute ago. She unfortunately has lost tonight, but we want to get her on to get her point of view on what happened in that race. Imani, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
No problem. I'm good, except we would have preferred that you won, of course.
Yes, me too.
So Imani, tell us about the race. So, every progressive gives it everything they got. We don't have a choice, right? And then you still get this lopsided result. What do you think happened? What were the biggest factors, in your opinion, that led to the result?
Yeah, so honestly, I think it was the money is the number one biggest factor. New Jersey is one of the most expensive places in the country to run, number one. Number two, when you run in New Jersey, you essentially have to run two campaigns. You have to run a candidate campaign to get people to elect you, but you also have to run an issue campaign because we have this corrupt ballot design that people are just now getting acclimated to the idea of it. And so essentially you have to raise $1 million to run a candidate and then essentially another $1 million to run an issue campaign. We were able to raise $500K off of, again, no corporate donations, which is great, but that is kind of something that covers the overhead and not kind of the extra stuff that then you have to go through in order to win here. So, I think that's the biggest issue. The other issue, though, I think is people in New Jersey. It's only been the last couple of cycles that we've seen like pretty serious challengers to the machine here. And I think that it's kind of like the early stages before, AOC won, where people just weren't really acclimated to having a challenger just yet. And I think we're seeing that here as well, where there were, certain kind of techniques that we were using that may have worked in other landscapes where they're kind of used to challengers by now. But it's a little bit too early in the cycle for New Jersey, where we are in our progressive movement at the moment.
Yeah, I got one more question for you before I go to the other hosts. So New Jersey, I grew up there, is kind of one giant suburb, right? There's a couple of cities like Camden, Newark, Trenton, et cetera. But overall, it's a huge suburb. So I don't know exactly where the 10th district is, but does it have a lot of suburbs? And are suburban voters a little bit harder to break into for progressives?
It's about half suburban, half urban in the 10th district. I actually don't think that suburban voters are harder to break into. And actually, I think it could maybe be argued that they're easier with regards to the ballot line. Because, typically the ballot design and all the conversations about that have been kind of like a highbrow conversation. It's been very ivory tower. And typically the suburban areas are more tuned into those conversations. So I would say because of the ballot line, it's actually a little bit easier for challengers to break in the suburbs because people are so upset about the lack of actual democracy in New Jersey. So I would say I don't really think it's a matter of policy or breaking in. I just think it's a matter of, of money and having to run essentially two campaigns at once.
Interesting. Okay, Jessica?
Yeah, I want to preface this for our viewers who have not worked in grassroots organizing or electoral politics, but it's becoming more expensive to even run a grassroots campaign. We usually associate progressives who don't take big money with just knocking doors, calling voters, and sending texts. But especially in a time of COVID where you can't just be in the street talking to people and knocking doors, you've got to use these tech tools to send mass messages and do mass phone banks. And these tech tools are getting bought up by large tech corporations that are investing in them and then making them more expensive to use and pricing out smaller campaigns and grassroots organizing nonprofits. And I know you've had to make some hard decisions about the grassroots organizing that you've done. Can you just talk a little bit about those decisions that you've had to make?
Oh yeah, making sure, so first of all, everybody who worked on my campaign, even if it was part-time, got paid, which is something that really the machine has an advantage on because they have, frankly, machine lackeys who will work on it for free because they're showing loyalty. Everybody who worked on my campaign got paid to the right amount. So I am proud of that, but it is something that is an expense. It's an overhead expense. And it becomes very, very expensive when you're not backed by a more well-funded org. I mean, everything we did was super grassroots. I mean, we didn't receive any even progressive PAC money, right? Progressive Elect Black Women PAC gave us $1,000, but that was it. The rest of it was just off of what we were generating as a campaign. So it's a lot of overhead that has to be paid. And then once you pay the overhead, you have what you have left to kind of do the extra stuff like mailers, which are super expensive, going on TV, et cetera, et cetera. And then just the money, I think, is really the biggest hindrance in this race.
Imani, I wanted to ask you a question, following up with what you mentioned earlier, that this isn't an area that's necessarily used to challenges in this way, that you felt you had to sort of build up that. So I was curious, based on your experience, how much, to what extent you experienced some of the things that normally make it much more difficult for a challenge in this way. Things that we've talked about through the special so far, the media completely ignoring primary challengers, not giving them the time of the day, the media pretending that progressive challengers are inherently radical, and then also during primaries pretending that the incumbent is more progressive than they actually are to ward off challenges. Usually there aren't any debates. They won't actually go and make the case in front of people. Are those some of the challenges that you faced, and how do you feel like progressive challengers can get around some of these sort of baked in obstacles?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we faced obstacles from kind of day one, because in New Jersey, you're not even allowed to get the voting file from the state if you are challenging a challenger, right? So then you have to go and buy it from a private entity. So even just off rip, as far as getting information to even talk to voters, you have to spend money in order to do that. That was there. I mean, there's also the fact that, we got outspent 3-1. We were not covered except, I mean, we were fortunate enough to be covered in a few larger outlets. And of course, indie media, thank God for indie media. We were covered very well by indie media. So thank you all for that. But there were outlets that we were reaching out to for months. I mean, it's funny, even the New York Times, they actually came and interviewed me and took pictures of me like in the neighborhood and everything. And that article never came out. Oh, so, we lacked that coverage. And then you're right, there was all the scrutiny in the world on us and my messaging and what I was running on. And then there was just no scrutiny on, my opponent with regards to his record and not showing up and things of that nature. So it's, again, the money, having to pay for things that, the establishment just gets, like voter files, as well as the coverage, you having to fight tooth and nail for it. And, not for nothing, this campaign actually did what I think are some newsworthy things. For example, we actually saved a Black community from having their voting power obliterated during redistricting. We actually saved the entire neighborhood from getting carved out of where their voting power would be 53% to then going and being 8%. We saved the neighborhood doing that, and nobody covered that. But I mean, and again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I do think that's newsworthy that a progressive candidate went out of her way to save a neighborhood. But again, no coverage. So yeah, I met up against pretty much all of the same systemic things that progressive candidates run up against when they run.
Yeah, Imani, last quick question here. So I ran before, and on the night of the election when you lose, it's tough. So how you feeling on a personal level?
I'm sleepy. I'm ready to rest a bit. I do feel that we did the best that we can do off of what we had. Again, we didn't have the 2 mil that I think, having gone through this entire thing, I think around 2 mil is what you probably need in order to win a race like this. We didn't have that. We didn't have any of the big progressive PACs or powerhouses behind us. And we, not for nothing, got national attention and pretty good statewide attention off of running off of our own fumes, off of basically beams. So, I feel really good about what we did. Of course, I wanted to win. I definitely wanted to win. I really think the machine can be beaten. I think the ballot line can be beaten. But ultimately, I am proud of the work that we did, and I think it was significant.
All right, Imani Oakley, running a brave campaign in New Jersey. We appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate the fight in you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.